Well, thank you for gathering here today and to discuss this issue. Ms. Meek, what a testimony you've given to us. We ask a lot of military families, sacrifices far beyond what we are individually asked to do, and to think of the problems that are heaped on you by this frequent move. I have some data here that suggests military voters are 27% less likely to have voted than their civilian counterparts. That really troubles me, to think of the sacrifice you and your family are making and the fact that you are not participating, and you've described exactly why. Is this a common subject of discussion among military families when it comes election time?
Yeah, it has been something that comes up because mostly people are confused about how to vote, and we're trying to help each other navigate a really complicated process, all before these other policies that would make it that much more difficult.
Yeah, well, we certainly need to do better by you. Thank you and your family for your service. Ms. Stewart, I think about the League of Women Voters as being one of the most informative but placid organizations I've ever dealt with, and here you are filing a lawsuit. You really believe that the RAVE Act discriminates against women?
Absolutely. Our members are concerned. We are women-led and primarily like 97% women membership organization. And so many of our members have chosen to get married, have chosen to take the name of their husbands, and are concerned about whether or not they're going to have obstacles, whether that be this year, depending on when everything moves through, but certainly for 2026. And so we feel like it's an obligation of us to elevate something like this. We have leagues around the country right now who are talking to members of their community to highlight exactly who is concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to vote. And I had someone at dinner a couple of weeks ago tell me, hell, I've been divorced twice. And I was like, oh, God, girl, because it could be even more complicated. But you should not be penalized because you either chose to get married or chose to get divorced and changed your name. And so the complications that it has, we've seen as recent as what happened in March in New Hampshire. So this is real. This is not conjecture. This is people really having concerns and legitimate concerns about their ability to vote.
One last question for Mr. Logan. Just how much of a hardship would this documentary evidence turn out to be? Do you have any personal experience with that?
Well, I think, thank you for the question, Senator. I think the way the Act is written implies a significant administrative burden on all election offices. So again, in Los Angeles County with 5.8 million registered voters, just simply having the facilities and the staff to be able to serve those who would have to come to our office to provide the documentation we've not yet estimated what that cost would be, but would be significant on top of what we already do. The other thing that strikes me as particularly interesting is that my office actually holds the vital records for the residents of Los Angeles County, and yet the Act would not allow us to use the birth certificates that are on file in our building as a form of verification to at least bring that number down before taking on that administrative burden. And the last thing I would say is we have seen in recent elections, certainly from 2020 to 2024, the benefit of a voting model where voters can vote over a voting period and they can come in and actually register or change their registration during that time period. The provisions of the SAVE Act as written would make that extremely challenging in order to accommodate and would likely drive turnout down.
I'd like to ask you about one final thing, and that is the penalties of the RAVE Act, or SAVE Act, in terms of election officials. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I will say I was at a meeting last week here in town where this topic came up, and there seemed to be a great deal of interest in the possibility of having criminal penalties against election officials for errors and omissions. I think that layered on top of the pressure and the threats that have been made against election officials in this country over the last 4 and 8 years would create a very challenging environment to recruit, retain, and keep election officials in positions, and more importantly would create a barrier to our community members that we depend on to serve as election workers and poll workers at community voting locations. I think it would only take one case of somebody being sued in their personal capacity or charged with criminal penalties to quickly move out a whole slew of people who we rely on to conduct elections in this country.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.